Hello, I'm Rob, a Washington, D.C. tour guide. It's sunrise time here on the National Mall, and the cherry blossoms are in peak bloom. So let me hop around to the other side of the camera and show you around. And here we go. I'm starting over here by the Washington Monument because this is actually one of my favorite areas to see cherry blossoms, and it's because it's usually much less crowded here in the morning than it is on the actual Tidal Basin, which we will get to momentarily. You may have clicked on this video because you saw the thumbnail and you saw that this is Stumpy's final bloom, and that's true. When we get closer to it, I will talk more about Stumpy and the Tidal Basin seawall project that we just found out about a few weeks ago. So this is relatively new news, even to us tour guides and those who work around here and in the travel industry. But before we get too far, I should introduce myself. If you're a longtime TripHacks DC subscriber, you know this, but if you're new, hello. My name is Rob. I'm a tour guide, and I founded TripHacks DC back in 2017. TripHacks DC is a YouTube channel and a podcast where I share my best tips and travel tips to help you have a great time when you visit Washington, DC. It's also a tour company, and I have personally shown thousands of visitors my city since I founded it. There will be links to the podcast and the tour company in the description of this video if you want to check it out. This is actually my fourth virtual walking tour during peak bloom. I started doing this in 2021, a year that was supposed to be the year that tourism came back after COVID, but actually wound up being kind of a bust. A lot of big tourist sites did come back in 2021, but it took a really long time for many of them to reopen, and people wanted to travel, and they traveled. It was just generally to other areas. Big cities didn't do so well back then. Now, it is sunrise, like I said. I am recording this, and I am going to try to do minimal editing, at least as far as color correction and that sort of thing goes, because I really want to try to give you a chance to see as best as possible what I see. So because it's still morning, there might be some spots where the way the light is shining or the direction that I'm facing, it looks a little dark, and that's okay because that is more or less what I see. Like right now, you can see the sun rising. So I am looking right now to the east. As you know, the sun rises to the east. It rises over the Capitol Dome, and if you're on this side, behind the Washington Monument as well. So I am actually currently in between the Washington Monument and the World War II Memorial, and we will take a peek over there in a moment. But I wanted to do this again in 2024 because I tried it in 2021 as a way of showing people the blossoms if they weren't going to be able to make it to DC, and people really liked it. So I did another one in 2022, and people liked it again, and I did it again last year. And even though tourism is very much back now, and you will see that once we get over to the Tidal Basin shortly, I thought this is a pretty cool tradition, documenting this peak bloom every year. Of course, like I said before, I really like starting over here by the Washington Monument because the crowds are really small. And to be honest with you, if you wanted to hire a professional photographer and come take photos of yourself dressed up in fancy clothes during peak bloom, during the golden hour, the Washington Monument is probably where I would go. Of course, whenever I post about some kind of quote-unquote secret spot with smaller crowds, especially on the short video platforms like TikTok or Instagram Reels, I always get a bunch of keyboard warriors who like to tell me that I'm ruining the secret. And I think people vastly underestimate how much influence I actually have. If I had any amount of influence, we would not have the horrible traffic and gridlock that kind of ruins the vibes every year during the weekend of peak bloom. Because I very strongly always state you shouldn't try to drive around here, especially during peak bloom. It's the worst way to get around. It's the worst way to see the blossoms, and I will never get off my soapbox about that. And if I had any influence, we wouldn't have this problem. Let me tell you a little bit about the day I am visiting. It is Wednesday, March 20th. It is 7:30 a.m. So because it's sunrise time, it's that magical hour, that golden hour. When you look to the west, like I am right now, you can see the World War II Memorial. You can see the Lincoln Memorial off in the distance. and it just looks spectacular. Get out of here, bus. Okay. Always have to contend with things like that when you're trying to get a view. But when there's nothing in the way, that is a spectacular view. So the cherry blossoms are in peak bloom. The declaration was made 3 days ago on March 17th, and that is tied for the second earliest peak bloom ever. Unfortunately, I've got a really, really packed schedule this week, and so by the time I get a chance to edit the video and download it onto my system and everything, it's probably going to be a little bit later. I'll try to get this up as soon as I can, but if it's a week after I record this, I do apologize. It is just a very, very busy time of year for tourism. The temperature right now, it's cool. It's around 40 degrees, and it feels slightly colder because of the wind. But the reason I chose to record today versus any other day is because this is still probably going to be the best weather day of the week. And I just love coming and seeing these trees first thing in the morning. There are lighter crowds, but as you'll see shortly, it's never no crowds. And I checked the weather, and the next couple of days are predicted to be cold, and then the day after that, it looks like there's potentially a big rainstorm coming in. So I figured, in order to get the best possible footage for you, I'll come out on the nicest day, even if it winds up being a bit of a busy day. Now, I do think it's worth saying that this year's peak bloom was not only early, but it was way earlier than predicted as well. Every year, on or around March 1st, I think this year because it was a leap year, it was February 29th, but every year around March 1st, the National Park Service makes a prediction for peak bloom. And this year's prediction was for a declaration of peak bloom between March 23rd and 26th. And in reality, peak bloom was declared a full week early. I have become a bit of a curmudgeon about this prediction. I don't spread it around on my social channels. I don't make announcements from TripHacks DC, and I don't talk about the prediction because I think it's nothing more than a guess. And if you go on the official nps.gov website, it says that it is nearly impossible to predict peak bloom more than 10 days out. And then they go ahead and violate their own guidance by making a prediction that is more than 20 days out. The reason I dislike this prediction is because it suggests a level of precision that simply does not exist. For example, in my email inbox, I got an Axios news alert that said, and I quote, DC's cherry blossoms will hit peak bloom on March 23rd. To me, this is like if ESPN sent out an alert a month before the NFL season that said, Kansas City Chiefs will win Super Bowl this season. It's okay to make predictions. It can even be fun to make predictions, but don't treat them as matters of fact. Okay, now I'm coming up on Independence Avenue, and this is, quite frankly, one of my least favorite streets in all of Washington, D.C. If you've ever come on a tour with me, you know that because we do have to cross this street during the tour. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of people driving quickly. It's not pleasant. And I'm just going to go ahead and edit out me standing waiting for the light to change because that was a long light and you didn't come here to watch me standing for more than a minute waiting to cross the street. So I'm just going to go ahead and edit that out, and if I get caught at the next light, I will edit that out as well. But like I was saying, I don't like the prediction. I find it's not accurate, and I feel like people don't treat it as a prediction. They treat it as a statement of fact, and I don't think that's right. So I've become a grump about this, and I'm sorry to everyone who likes to make a big deal about the prediction day every year, but I feel like it's important because I feel that expectations management is one of the most important parts of planning a trip, and if you come in with the wrong expectations, you're only going to leave disappointed. So, looks like I'm going to get caught up at this light as well. And we'll edit forward to me crossing the street. So the advice that I personally give to people is to not try to time the peak bloom, don't try to time the blossoms, and definitely don't expect to see a peak bloom. If you get lucky and catch a peak bloom, amazing. But it's better to not create an expectation that only by luck can be met, and at worst will be a letdown. All right, so I've made it to the Tidal Basin, and as you will quickly see, there are quite a few more people over on the Tidal Basin than there were over by the Washington Monument. Once you cross over that Independence Avenue is when you start to see the big crowds. So let's go ahead and talk about crowds. This time of year is peak tourism season in DC. Not just because of the cherry blossoms, but because it's also spring break for a lot of school districts. There is basically no way to avoid crowds when cherry blossoms are in bloom, with one exception, which I will tell you in a moment. However, there are some general principles that you can follow to come at times of lower crowds. So, number one, come down in the morning versus midday. This view right here of the blossoms with the Jefferson Memorial framed in the background, everybody wants this photo, and everybody wants it when the light is good right now. So there's going to be people here in the morning. That's just the reality of it. But another reality is that there are a lot of people who don't like to wake up early. They're not early birds. So if you can set an alarm and make a cup of coffee and come down first thing in the morning, you will be rewarded with somewhat smaller crowds. Tip number 2, come after dark. I'm going to be completely honest now. The cherry blossoms photograph way better in daylight than they do after dark. That's why you almost never see photos hanging in frames in hotels or on postcards that were taken after dark. But if you just care about seeing the peak bloom or seeing the cherry blossoms rather than photographing them, then coming after dark is actually a great travel hack. At this time of year, sunset is around 7:30. So it's not even like you have to stay up that late. And to be honest, camera technology is so good now in 2024 that your photos might not even look that bad. I'll edit on a photo right now that I took yesterday that I think looks pretty good. So check it out and judge for yourself. Tip number 3, come on weekdays versus weekends. The truth is that most of the people here seeing the cherry blossoms right now are not tourists from out of town. They're locals who live in the Washington, D.C. metro area. The D.C. metro area has a population over 5 million, and that's the size of some entire countries. So on weekdays, when people have to work or their kids have to go to school and they have chores and life, there are just smaller crowds here than on the weekends when more people are off of work and kids are off of school. Tip number 4, come during worse weather. Here's another truth. The better the weather, the bigger the crowds. And the worse the weather, the smaller the crowds. I said a few minutes ago I would tell you the one and only time you can come and see peak bloom with no crowds. And that's on a very wet, rainy day. I'm going to go through some of my photos and edit on a photo from peak bloom in the past on a rainy day, and you will see that I am basically the only one there. And I also know this is an extremely unsatisfying thing to say because people really want to see peak bloom in perfect weather with no crowds. But I'm sorry, that's a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. The absolute heaviest crowds are always, and I say this with confidence, on whichever day of peak bloom on the weekend has the nicest weather. This year, it's looking like that's going to be this upcoming Sunday because the forecast right now is for Saturday to be wet and rainy. That could still change, but if the forecast holds, then I expect Sunday to be the most crowded day of the year out here on the Tidal Basin. Now let's talk about the blossoms and the stages of blossoming, because if you come too early, and this year not too many people came too early because we had such an early bloom, you might wonder, how much longer might I have to wait for these to bloom? So there are 6 stages of blossoming. Stage 1 is the green bud phase, which happens several weeks before, and that's as the name suggests, when green buds appear on the cherry trees. Stage 2 is called florets visible. That's about 14 days in advance, and that's when you can first start to see pink or white flowers just start to poke out. And before I continue, just to point out, the paddle boats. The paddle boats are the only water-based vehicle that are allowed on the actual tidal basin here. And even though I personally don't usually sign up to do the paddle boats, I have gotten tips from several of my tour guests that doing the paddle boats during the bloom was one of the more fun things that they did. Just make sure you make a reservation in advance, because during busy times of year, like right now, they do tend to book up. So, back to the blossoming. We get to stage 3, which is extension of florets. Happens about 12 days beforehand, and that's where you can really start to see the pink or the white flowers start to grow out of those green buds. But the blossom itself is still completely closed. Stage 4 is every tour guide's favorite, because we like to say it, peduncle elongation, which happens about a week beforehand when the flower stems get longer and you can just start to see the individual blossoms starting to form. Stage 5 is called puffy or fluffy white, and that's right before peak bloom. That's right before the bloom when the flowers start to open up. So if you come a little too early, you can often come during the fluffy white stage, and even though it's not a full bloom, it still looks very nice and you can still get some very nice photos. And of course, stage 6, peak bloom or full bloom, is when the flowers are completely open. Now, peak bloom specifically is defined as the date when 70% of the Yoshino cherry trees out here are open. And most of what you're seeing right now and what you've seen as I've been walking around for the last 15 minutes are the Yoshinos. There are about a dozen different varieties of cherry trees in DC, and most of them are the Yoshinos. The good news is, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, some of these varieties are early bloomers and some are later bloomers. So depending on exactly when you're here, even if you don't catch a peak bloom, as long as you come during roughly the spring break period, you should be able to see something in bloom. Now, another important question that I get frequently is, how long do they last? Once peak bloom is declared, how quickly do I have to rush to the tidal basin to see them? My general rule is 1 week, 7 days. Once peak bloom is declared, try to get here within 7 days, if possible, of course. In perfect conditions, cherry blossoms can last up to 2 weeks. Perfect conditions are, it's hard to imagine we're ever going to get perfect conditions in Washington, D.C., because that would mean no rain, no wind, and relatively mild temperatures, or even cool temperatures. Here's the reality. March in Washington, D.C. is both the rainiest month and the windiest month. So when we do get an early bloom, especially a March bloom, the chances that we're not going to get some rainy days and some windy days during peak bloom are very low. In 2020, we actually hit peak bloom early on March 24th. That's still considered an early peak bloom. And they started to fall just a few days later because of the conditions that year. Peak bloom did not last for very long. Of course, 2020 was also the year that very few people were here. That was right at the beginning of COVID, but it is a good way to illustrate that once we hit peak bloom, the clock is already ticking. Okay, so we're starting to get over to the Jefferson Memorial, and I will tell you about the seawall project, and then we'll go see Stumpy once we get a little bit closer. But I first just want to point out that on this path that I'm walking right now, this is where one of the indicator trees is located. And people ask me sometimes where the indicator tree is located. They want to find it, especially if they're here early, because the idea is that the indicator tree tends to bloom a couple of weeks early. I think it's 10 to 14 days early or something like that. And so once that tree is bloomed, then you start the countdown and you can expect a peak bloom somewhere in that time period. This is not science per se. There's no guarantee that after X number of days, once the indicator tree is blossomed, that we're going to have a peak bloom. But it's a fun little thing that, as a tour guide, someone who's here all the time, we like to stop by and take a peek and see how it's doing in the weeks leading up. I also want to talk quickly about Eliza Skidmore, who I mentioned in my podcast episode that I recently did on this topic. I also talked about her in the interview that I did on my podcast with the authors of the book 111 Places in Women's History That You Must Not Miss. I think she deserves way more credit than she is given for bringing the Blossoms to Washington, D.C. The story of the Blossoms goes way back to the 1800s, to the years following the Civil War. This person, Eliza Skidmore, went to college, became a writer, was a very accomplished woman. She got to travel the world, something that not a lot of people got to do back then. It was helpful that her brother was a diplomat. She loved the Blossoms in Japan, wanted to bring them to D.C. where she lived, and tried to tell anyone in any position of authority about how great it would be to bring these trees over from Japan to DC, but nobody would listen. That was the problem at that period of time, was that she was a very accomplished woman, but people didn't take people like her seriously. Finally, in 1909, she got the attention of Helen Taft. If the name Taft sounds familiar, it's because the president was William Howard Taft, and the First Lady was Helen Taft. One thing that Helen Taft had was political connections. Now, the First Lady actually has very limited official responsibility, but unofficially has quite a few political connections. And so Helen Taft was the one who was ultimately able to get it done. And that's not to say that she has no role in this process. It's just to say that in the telling of the story, typically you will hear Helen Taft given the credit and Eliza Skidmore barely mentioned. And so I think Eliza deserves a little bit more credit. Maybe First Lady Taft a little bit less credit. They can share. They're both part of the story. So we're coming up now on the Jefferson Memorial. And as you'll see in a moment, construction at the Jefferson Memorial continues. I know this is frustrating to a lot of people. As a tour guide, it's frustrating to me too. We have had multiple projects over here at the Jefferson Memorial. The first one was a roof repair and removal of what's called biofilm from the top of the dome. As you can kind of see right now, the top of the dome is now nice and clean, squeaky clean. But after they finished that project, they started the current project, which is to redo the, I guess you could say, the underneath area of the memorial. They're going to put in new exhibit about Thomas Jefferson, new store, new restrooms, and most importantly, new elevator. In the meantime, the elevator situation is not good. They have a temporary lift that is sadly not reliable. So I really, really hope this project can get done soon, because it will be a huge improvement once that happens. Okay, now let's talk about the seawall project. We have to talk about it because it was just announced. And even though it was just announced, it's not like we just discovered that there's a problem with the seawall here at the Tidal Basin. Here's the harsh reality. The Tidal Basin is sinking, and sea levels are rising. In terms of numbers, the Tidal Basin is 5 feet lower than it was when it was built over 100 years ago, and the water level is 1 foot higher. That's a 6-foot discrepancy that is causing all kinds of problems, and the Tidal Basin is in really, really bad shape. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has called it one of America's most endangered places. Now, I'm going to edit on some footage that I took last year, 2023, of this area right here. In this footage, you're going to see it's flooded, and you can see when it's bad, just how bad it gets. Now, this is one of the more significant floods, but this area basically floods every single day now during high tide. When I posted this footage on TikTok, there were a lot of keyboard warriors in the comments who said things like, "So it rained a little and flooded. It happens all the time. What's the big deal?" And I kind of think that proves the point that I'm making about how big of a deal it is, because a little rain should not cause this kind of damage. And maybe it's because I walk this exact path hundreds of times per year, and if you've taken a tour with me, we've walked this path before, but you can pretty clearly see that this is an emergency situation, and it has been for a long time. So this project is way overdue, and even though it took way too long to get the necessary approvals and the necessary funding, This project is badly needed and, like I said, overdue. Okay, now, perhaps the whole reason you have tuned in so far, let's talk about Stumpy. Stumpy is a little cherry tree. Stumpy is not in good health. We're going to see Stumpy soon, but Stumpy's trunk is mostly rotted out, and Stumpy really only has kind of one big branch left. And yet, despite being flooded by high tide nearly every day, Stumpy still blooms every year, including today. And for a lot of people, they love the symbolism of Stumpy and the idea that even in the toughest of times, you can still bloom. But I just want to show this to show you this looks bad. This is what it looks like, and it's not even a high tide right now. So you can start to imagine during an actual high tide, it gets really bad. There's big pools of water all the way up here. Many times when I give a tour, we do go from the Jefferson Memorial over to the FDR Memorial, and I can't take this path because it's underwater. We have to go all the way up to the big street up where the tour buses load and unload and take that path instead. So here's Stumpy. Everybody's come out to see Stumpy this year to say their final goodbyes. I've seen some interesting photos and videos of Stumpy. Someone has dressed up in a Stumpy costume. They've made Stumpy into a mascot. I actually think Stumpy got signed as a free agent to be the mascot for this year's Cherry Blossom 10 miler, which is coming up in a few weekends. I saw the racing presidents, speaking of mascots, the Nationals mascots, the racing presidents were over here to say their goodbyes to Stumpy. I've seen musicians come and serenade Stumpy. I've seen all kinds of things this year because, yes, this will be Stumpy's final bloom. So here comes the not so good news. The seawall rebuilding project is going to take about 3 years, and it's going to require the removal of about 158 cherry trees right here. So what you're seeing now on this walk, this is probably it. If I do this again next year, and by the way, leave me a comment, let me know if you want me to do this again next year, because I'm always curious if people like these. So leave a comment, let me know if you do. But if I do this again next year, the walk is going to be quite a bit different, I suspect, and many of these trees will be no more. So a lot of people have been coming out to say goodbye to Stumpy. Stumpy is going to be sent to the National Arboretum here in DC, and they will use it to propagate new trees. Now, I am not a scientist, I'm not a botanist. I'm sorry, I can't tell you the science behind how all of this works exactly, but at the end of the project, the National Park Service says they will have planted even more trees than what we have now. So even though there will be some trees removed for the construction project, with the new plantings that they'll do at the end, we will actually have a net gain in cherry trees. So it's definitely going to be a situation of short-term pain for longer-term gain. Now this is called the Inlet Bridge. This is where water flows from the Potomac River to the Tidal Basin, and I crossed over the Outlet Bridge earlier. So those are the two places where water flows in and out. This is always a bit of a choke point. I really don't like the way that they have this set up for foot traffic and car traffic. If I was in charge of the National Park Service and the National Mall area, believe me, we would do things a lot differently. People on foot would be given a lot more space, but alas, I am not in charge. And so this continues to be one of the unfortunate checkpoints on the route. Now, you might have heard there are some people who think Stumpy should be saved at all costs, including people who think the entire seawall project should be canceled because we need to save Stumpy. I think, personally, my opinion incoming, that there are no good choices here. The tidal basin is in a state of emergency. It would be like if your house was on fire and when the fire department showed up, you refused to let them use the hose because you have some precious heirlooms inside and you don't want them to get wet. Look, the heirlooms are not going to survive. Whether you save the rest of your house or not is up to you. And there is some precedent for this, of course, which is to say that there have been protests here at the tidal basin before when it comes to the cherry trees. So in the past, the Jefferson Memorial didn't exist. It was built in the 1940s, and when it opened, there were some local ladies who thought it would be a horrible shame to have to remove the cherry trees in order to build the Jefferson Memorial. And so they protested. They protested, and as the story goes, bit of an urban legend, they chained themselves to the cherry trees. Of course, they were not successful. The Jefferson Memorial was built, it exists, and it's hard to imagine now the Jefferson Memorial not existing as the reason because they wanted to save some of the cherry trees. And a similar thing actually happened at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, where during the construction, some cherry trees had to be removed, relocated. But after construction was finished, even more cherry trees were planted, and they were incorporated into the actual design of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. And I am heading over there as we speak, and once I get over there, you will be able to see what it looks like. And in my opinion, it looks quite nice, and again, there was some short-term pain, but we definitely got a long-term gain. So I'm back on the Tidal Basin now. I'm going to kind of cut through this area. It tends to get very busy, very crowded on this path because in the morning, this is where you can get some of the best light, especially if you're trying to get those good photos with the Washington Monument framed up. And so we're probably going to see some cameras. We're probably going to see some photographers. I thought I saw earlier what looked like some kids in a high school photography class or photography club. And so we'll probably see some more of those guys out once we get a little bit closer to the MLK Memorial. But I do like this path because it is one of the best lit areas at this time of year. So straight ahead, that's the Japanese pagoda. This was a gift from the mayor of Yokohama in 1957. It is meant to be a symbol of friendship between the United States and Japan. And other than that, we don't really know very much about it. There's some things where we have a very good sense of why they were gifted to us, and other things, not quite so sure. So this is the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial coming up ahead. I'm not going to walk you through the entire thing. I have a guided tour of the monuments, and the Franklin Roosevelt Memorial is the largest, it's the longest, and the reason why, if you take a tour with me, the tour takes minimum of 2.5 hours is because this one alone is so big. And that's kind of ironic because Franklin Roosevelt did not want this place. He made his wishes very well known during his lifetime. He said he wanted a small, modest memorial at the National Archives, a memorial that does exist, and I have made some short videos about it. It's right on the lawn on Pennsylvania Avenue outside the National Archives, and it says Franklin Delano Roosevelt on it. That's the little modest memorial he wanted. This one here is big and it's grand, and it's definitely not the one that he wanted. But it opened in the 1990s, well after he was gone, and at a time when his wishes were not respected quite as much as they might have been closer to when he was around. So this is personally one of my favorite memorials because it's got a lot of great stories. And interestingly, at the end of all of my tours, I ask, of all the things we saw over the last few hours, which one is your favorite? And you might think that there's one that is just the universal favorite. Everybody loves the most popular monument. And if you don't know what that is, you can probably guess. And in my experience, that's not how it goes. People say lots of different things for lots of different reasons. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because recently, a lot of people have been telling me this one, the FDR Memorial, is their favorite. And that really just warms my heart because this is, I think, one of the most frequently skipped memorials for people who don't come on a tour. And the reason for that, I think, is because when you're walking from the Washington Monument to the Jefferson Memorial, the shortest path is the one I took earlier, which is on the other side of the basin. And so most people, if they're just looking to go see Jefferson as quickly and easily as possible, they will go on that side of the water, and then they will go back on that side of the water. And for that reason, this one, unfortunately, tends to get skipped. And that is why people sign up for a tour, is so that they can see the things that maybe in the past they've come to DC and didn't see, but that they want to know about. Now, if you are curious about Franklin Roosevelt or Theodore Roosevelt, I made a video, collaboration video, with the Megan Daly, a fantastic tour guide from New York City and big fan of all the Roosevelts. And we posted a collaboration video on her channel, the Megan Daly. I will link to it in the description. And so you can check it out if you're interested and learn a little bit about this place. So I'm going to go back out to the water, cut over to the MLK Memorial. Yeah, here's some kids from that photo club I thought I saw earlier, or photo class. And I just want to reiterate that there are many varieties of cherry trees in DC. The ones that are in peak bloom right now are the Yoshinos, the white single blossom, first discovered in Tokyo around the 1800s, and now one of the favorite cherry trees both in Japan and in DC. The second most common cherry blossom is the Kwanzan, and these make up about 13% of the cherry trees here in the park, and they are a bright pink colored double blossom, which means there are essentially 2 blossoms per bud. And the Kwanzans are late bloomers. Typically they bloom about 2 weeks later than the Yoshinos, and that's important because it means that if you really wanted to come to Washington, D.C. to catch a peak bloom, you made your travel plans, you decided this year, for example, you're coming the first week in April or the second week in April, well, I'm sorry to say you're gonna miss peak bloom. But because the Kwanzans are late bloomers, you should be able to see some Kwanzans in bloom. And you will know when you see them because they are bright pink and very distinct from the Yoshinos. And actually that raises a good point, which is to say that the official color of the National Cherry Blossom Festival is pink. Everything is pink themed. They have the pink tie party. Pink is definitely the go-to color. And I think that sometimes leads people to misunderstand that not all cherry blossoms are pink. And in fact, most of the cherry blossoms that you will see in DC are not pink. They're white. But I understand why they choose pink as their official color. I think it's more unique. If you're going to dress up in pink, you're going to look pretty unique. If you dress up in, white, I don't know, white is kind of the color of like a wedding, right? Or Wimbledon tennis tournament, I don't know. And so pink is definitely more unique, more distinct. A lot of photographers over on this spot. This is definitely one of those spots where if you want to get those photos that you're going to hang in a frame, you're going to sell on the stock photo websites, you're probably going to get it from right there. You can get some good framing and some good light. Dog right there to the left. Sometimes people ask me, is the National Cherry Blossom Festival dog friendly? And the short answer is yes. Of course, follow all the proper rules, pick up after your dog, keep your dog on a leash, just be a good dog owner, generally speaking. So yes, in theory, officially, the National Cherry Blossom Festival is dog friendly. The caveat to that is not every dog is happy when they're in big crowds. I have dogs. I have a dog that loves to go outside, loves to run around, play ball, but not a huge fan of crowds. So last year I did bring him down on a busy day and he was just not digging it. So this is a situation where, just like with your kids, you know them best. You know what they can tolerate. You know what kind of crowds will stress them out. And so if your dog is not one that is a fan of crowds or doesn't like to be around a lot of people, then don't bring them. Think about their happiness first, and that's something that only you will know. So I already showed you one of my favorite spots to see cherry blossoms, which is over by the Washington Monument. A few other touristy spots where you can see cherry blossoms include the Supreme Court, the Library of Congress, which are both near the Capitol. They have some spectacular cherry trees over there. The U.S. Naval Observatory is where the Vice President lives. That's a bit uptown, but there are some nice cherry blossoms up there. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, of course, is personally one of my favorite spots to see cherry blossoms. If you've been on a tour with me, I've said this. This is actually my favorite statue of all the statues out here on the tour, for the reason that this is really the only statue where the background is the sky. So look at that sky today, those white puffy clouds with a blue sky behind them, and the bloom, the peak bloom a little bit lower. There are very few days of the year that I get to see the statue with a bloom in the background, and I can confidently say I've never seen it with that exact sky in the background as well. So like I said, the incorporation of the cherry trees into this memorial was very, very intentional. Oop, having a bit of a camera issue right now. Hopefully I can fix that. The incorporation of the cherry trees into this memorial was very intentional, and I think they're going to do something similar with the seawall project where, yes, it's going to be a bit of pain. It's probably going to be a bit ugly for the next few years, but once it's done, we will have something. If we have something like this to look forward to, then I gotta say it'll be worth the wait. A few other places you can see cherry trees. Capitol Hill, there's a park called Stanton Park. That's definitely a local's favorite place where you can go. Rawlins Park is another kind of local's favorite. It's near Foggy Bottom. The National Arboretum, of course, big museum of trees. There are cherry trees at Arlington National Cemetery. However, I don't advise you to go over there to see cherry trees. Go over to Arlington Cemetery to see the cemetery, to pay your respects, and the trees are a bit of a bonus, but we don't want to have big crowds going over there just to look at trees. We want to make sure that everyone is respectful when they go over to Arlington Cemetery. I did a video a few years back around the National Cathedral with Carolyn from DC Design Tours. They actually have a cherry blossom themed tour in that neighborhood, and so that is not a well-advertised spot, but where you can go. Basically, you can find cherry trees anywhere. Okay, had to reset my camera. Not quite sure what was going on. It's always a little challenging to do these, whether it's live or whether it's recorded like this, because I often have technical difficulties. The Washington Nationals do cherry blossom themed game every year. There are a ton of cherry trees right outside Nationals Park behind I think it's the home plate gate. It's the one kind of the farthest away from the center field gate where you would typically enter from the Metro. And I actually went over there last weekend because they tend to be fairly early bloomers. And they were definitely in peak bloom and they were looking spectacular. So I posted that on an Instagram story. I said, nobody's here. If you want to come get some portraits in front of some cherry blossoms in peak bloom, come over to Nationals Park because they are definitely in peak bloom. But my point is that every neighborhood in DC has a place where you can see cherry blossoms. There's an organization called Casey Trees. They map them out. If you look at the map really zoomed out, it just looks like they're kind of everywhere. I also recorded a video of me riding my bike around East Potomac Park. So not sure if I'm going to get this one edited first or that one edited first. Probably the bike ride because it's going to be a shorter video. But check out the video description. I will leave a link to that. You can do a bike ride around East Potomac Park. That's one of my personal favorite ways to see the blossoms. Basically, my advice when it comes to this stuff is if you ever get a chance to come to Washington, D.C. in spring, you should take it because it's just a great time here. The vibes are good. We've just come out of the winter months. And people are just happy that, winter is over, that the sky is blue instead of gray as it feels like it's been for the last month during February. And so I like this time of year because it just feels like there's generally good vibes. However, because it is so notoriously difficult to time, don't expect to see a peak bloom. Be happy with the bloom that you get. And if you get a peak bloom, amazing. You've gotten extremely lucky. If you don't get a peak bloom, there will be something, whether it's the magnolias that bloom early or whether it's the Kwanzans that bloom late. Don't feel bad just because you missed the peak. It always looks nice, and just come and enjoy the vibes. Some of the events at the National Cherry Blossom Festival, like the parade, like the Kite Festival, they're fun, they're great even when things are not in peak bloom.